This mini lesson will cover 3 ways to analyze visuals. There are 3 kinds of analysis that we can apply to visuals for this project. The first is genre analysis, the second is visual analysis, and the third is rhetorical analysis. Now, as a side note, as we go through this mini lesson, you may want to have some of the sample pieces open on your browser so that you can pause this video and click back and forth between the slides where we talk through the analysis and the samples that we have posted to Blackboard. So let's get started. The first layer of analysis that we can apply to visuals, and particularly infographics for this project, is genre analysis. So we think here about the word genre being French for type or sort, and genre analysis basically analyzes a type of communication specifically to look at its conventions or features that are regularly seen in the communication. These conventions can be in terms of content, so what does the piece of communication talk about? It can be in terms of form. How is it laid out? What form does it come in? Is it short form, long form? Is it visual with some key words around it? Is this a lot of text, a little bit of text? Is it multimodal? Does it happen online? And finally, style, which comes down to the tone of the writing, if it feels very irreverent, formal, if it's very personal, or if it follows certain disciplinary standards. When you're looking at a genre of communication, you always want to think about how this piece of communication is meeting the audience's expectations. So oftentimes, for example, if we look at a flyer for a concert, the flyer is going to have visuals on it and text that's going to meet the audience's expectations. It'll have the location of the concert. It'll have a picture that represents either the style of the music or the band. And then the medium comes into play in genre analysis because we think about where we find this communication in nature or in space. Do you find it online? Do you come across it on a social media platform? Is it a website? Do you find it in your everyday life? Is it tacked on a bulletin board or stapled on a telephone pole? Is it something that's presented formally, such as in a classroom or in a lecture situation? Is it something that's presented very informally? Is it written on a sidewalk? Is it on a billboard? All of these things come into play when we think about genre analysis. So let's look at a sample of an infographic. This is one of the samples that's accessible to you via Blackboard. But here we have this infographic, and when we look at it, we want to go through the steps of genre analysis because we want to know what's the content, what's the form, what's the style of the writing. We want to think about what the audience's expectations might be and the medium of where we came across this. So take a minute and look at this infographic and see if you can identify all of these things. Another thing we want to think about when it comes to genre analysis is what makes the genre what it is. What makes a poem and not an essay? What makes a billboard and not a fortune cookie fortune? So here we want to think about, well, what's the content? What's being explained to us? And how is it being explained? Is it just being explained with text? Is it just being explained with visuals? Or is it being explained with a combination of text and visuals? Are the visuals random, haphazard, or systematic? Is the tone very formal, highly academic, or more popular? Now, something that's interesting to note is that you'll see at the bottom here that there are sources cited, but infographics do not follow a formal academic citation style such as MLA. So while it's important to cite your sources, you do not need to use MLA citation style. The second kind of analysis that we want to talk about today is visual analysis. So when you have a type of communication like the infographic that uses visuals, there are particular conventions that help to break down a piece of communication that uses visuals. For example, we can think about how things are laid out or arranged, which gives some images priority over others. We can think about, size, shape, color, and line. So these are basic art or design elements that make a visual more or less pleasing to look at. Composition overall. So this has to do with a combination of visuals and texts and how everything is laid out. These are formal design elements. Now, when we look at something like this infographic, there are some key formal design elements that we can identify. So, for example, in terms of layout, it's top to bottom. The information is broken into key segments. Each segment is labeled. And there are repeating visual tropes. So a trope is an element that comes up over and over again. So you've got, obviously, a little poop emoji. That's a repeating trope. And you've got the toilet paper, which is also a repeating trope, and the little fly. So there's repetition, but this repetition is purposeful because it lends continuity to a visual that has a lot of elements on it. Also, there's key things to think about, like the use of blank space. Not every inch of this infographic is covered. There are key spaces around each visual that's paired with text. This gives the eye a place to rest. The last layer of analysis that we'll talk about in this mini lesson is, of course, rhetorical analysis. And we're very familiar with this going back all the way to Project 1. The thing with rhetorical analysis is that you need both genre and visual analysis to perform rhetorical analysis on a piece of visual communication. Because what you're doing is you're thinking about the genre and you're thinking about the design elements, adding in rhetorical situation. So you're thinking about what the image does and how effectively or not it does it. So you want to think about the purpose of the image, whether or not it's effective for the audience. So you can arrange a lot of things on a visual and it cannot be visually effective. And you want to think about how you can use both images and text to create rhetorical appeals. So, for example, you can use images and text together to create a pathos appeal, for instance. Like in our poop infographic. We've got different little poop emojis here underneath shades of poop. And by playing around with the facial expressions, if you will, on each little poop emoji, there are different levels of pathos here. Almost all of it is like a humorous take on pathos. But then we also have a lot of logos here because there are lots of important facts that are written in the text that are also represented in the visuals.